Winona Fletcher. Winona M. Fletcher was 14 years old when she committed a triple homicide in Anchorage, Alaska, on April 22, 1985, making her the youngest female ever convicted in the state. Born around 1971, she endured a childhood defined by harm. She had a learning disability, with verbal IQ tested at 77, was held back in school, placed in special education, and dropped out after 6th grade. By 13, she was homeless, a runaway, working on the streets, and heavily using substances. Her boyfriend, Cordell Boyd, then 18, began a relationship with Fletcher when she was 13, legally constituting harm of a minor. Boyd supplied her with substances. Fletcher's defense attorneys later argued Boyd was exploiting her. She lived under stairs, in sheds, and in empty apartments. "I thought that he loved me," she later said. Who doesn't want to be loved? On April 22, 1985, Fletcher and Boyd entered the home of Tom Faccio, 69 years old, Ann Faccio, 70 years old, and Ann's sister, Amelia Elliott, 75 to 76 years old, in Anchorage's Russian Jack neighborhood under the pretense of needing a telephone. Boyd demanded money and received approximately $700. Then all 3 elderly occupants were shot. Court records state Fletcher shot Ann Faccio and Amelia Elliott. Testimony indicated that Ann Faccio was praying on her knees before Fletcher pulled the trigger. Who bore primary responsibility has been fiercely debated. 2 days after Fletcher's sentencing, Boyd told an Anchorage newspaper he had lied at trial. He claimed he told Fletcher to end the women's lives. "She didn't want to end those people," Boyd said. "She only did it because she loved me." By then, his plea deal was finalized, and he faced no additional consequences. Boyd and Fletcher were arrested in June 1985, roughly 2 months after the acts, after Boyd bragged to a cellmate about the incidents. After arrest, Fletcher was taken to the McLaughlin Youth Center, where her handwritten notes reflected a childlike mentality. "I'm afraid that the judge might say that he wants me in a jail to make sure that I won't get away." At a multi-week juvenile waiver hearing in late 1985, Judge Carl Johnstone ruled Fletcher should be tried as an adult. Of 5 mental health professionals who evaluated her, 1 said she had a moral deficiency, and the other 4 said she had poor prognosis for rehabilitation. Fletcher, then 15, pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree ending and 1 count of second-degree ending. On December 17, 1986, she was sentenced to 297 years, 99 per victim, later reduced to 135 years. Boyd received 99 years for 1 count under a plea deal. The case catalyzed Alaska's victims' rights movement. The Faccio daughters founded Victims for Justice, and victims' rights were eventually enshrined in the Alaska Constitution. In 2005, Fletcher filed for post-conviction relief, citing Boyd's recantation and new juvenile brain research. 3 of the 5 original psychologists revised their opinions. One stated he would almost certainly have concluded Fletcher could be rehabilitated. In 2011, Alaska's Court of Appeals dismissed the claim on procedural grounds. But in May 2023, the same court issued a landmark ruling that Alaska's Constitution requires sentencing courts to consider a juvenile offender's youth and its attendant characteristics before imposing de facto life without parole. Fletcher was entitled to resentencing. Resentencing hearings took place in August and September 2025. On September 8, 2025, Judge Jack McKenna reduced Fletcher's sentence to 60 years, equating to 40 years served under Alaska's mandatory parole statute. She was released that night from Highland Mountain Correctional Center at 54 years old. The judge stated Boyd had been exploiting, sexually harming, and trafficking Fletcher, and that, somehow, it was decided by the court at the time that the underage girl who was being harmed was somehow the ringleader. Some Faccio family members submitted statements supporting the possibility of redemption. What makes Fletcher's case so significant is the evolution of understanding about juvenile brain development and culpability. In 1986, 5 psychologists evaluated a 14-year-old girl. 4 said she had poor prognosis for rehabilitation. 20 years later, 3 of those same professionals revised their opinions after reviewing new research on adolescent brain development. The handwritten note, "I'm afraid that the judge might say that he wants me in a jail to make sure that I won't get away," reveals the mentality of someone barely past middle school. The spelling errors, the childlike fear, the complete lack of sophistication. This was the person sentenced to 297 years. Boyd's recantation 2 days after her sentencing, admitting he told her to end. The women came when his plea deal was already finalized. He faced no additional consequences for this admission. He received 99 years for 1 count, while Fletcher received 297 for 3 counts, despite his later claim that he directed her actions. While Fletcher's case involved a teenage girl exploited by an older boyfriend, the next case would involve a relationship between 2 students that ended in the brutal slaying of her parents. Elizabeth Haysom. Elizabeth Roxanne Haysom was born on April 15, 1964, in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the daughter of Derek Haysom, a Canadian steel executive, and Nancy Astor Benedict Haysom, an artist and goddaughter of Lady Astor. Elizabeth attended elite boarding schools in Switzerland and England, including Wycombe Abbey. She was reportedly expelled and ran away at least once. She enrolled at the University of Virginia in 1984 as an honors Eccles scholar, but had a penchant for heroin, LSD, and extravagant tales, many of them untrue. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and described her as a pathological liar. At UVA, she met Jens Soering, the 18-year-old son of a German diplomat. Both felt out of place among American students and began an intense relationship. Elizabeth's parents opposed it, fueling resentment. On March 30, 1985, Derek Haysom, 72 years old, and Nancy Haysom, 53 years old, were slashed and stabbed to death at their home in Bedford County, Virginia. Both were nearly decapitated. They were collectively struck approximately 50 times. Nothing was stolen. The prosecution's theory held that Soering drove alone from a Washington, D.C. hotel to the Haysom home while Elizabeth remained behind, constructing an alibi, buying movie tickets, and ordering room service. The rental car's mileage was consistent with a round trip from D.C. to Bedford and back. Investigators discovered the excess mileage on the rental car and focused on the couple. In fall 1985, with police closing in, Soering and Haysom fled to Europe, traveling under false names. They were arrested in London on April 30, 1986, for check fraud. Scotland Yard found diaries and letters discussing doing voodoo on her parents. Soering confessed to London police in detail on multiple occasions. His blood type matched unidentified blood at the crime scene, though his fingerprints did not match any prints found there. In 2009, DNA testing of 11 usable samples excluded both Soering and Haysom. The unidentified blood belonged to an unknown male. Elizabeth Haysom pleaded guilty in 1987 to 2 counts of accessory before the fact, and was sentenced to 90 years, 2 consecutive 45-year terms. Soering's extradition became the landmark European Court of Human Rights case establishing that extradition could violate Article 3. At his 1990 trial, Soering recanted his confession, claiming he had confessed falsely to protect Elizabeth. Elizabeth testified against him. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The case went through decades of appeals. The 2009 DNA testing excluded both defendants from all testable crime scene samples. In 2017, a sheriff released a 19-page report concluding Soring was innocent. Prominent figures advocated for Soring's release. After 14 parole denials, both were finally paroled on November 25, 2019, by the Virginia Parole Board with Governor Ralph Northam's approval, conditioned on deportation. As recently as February 6, 2026, Soring's attorney filed suit to overturn his conviction based on new DNA evidence. Elizabeth Haysom was deported to Canada on January 22, 2020, and is believed to be living in Western Canada. She has remained entirely out of the public spotlight and has not spoken about the case since her release. Soring was deported to Germany in December 2019, where he works as a resilience coach, author, and YouTuber. He continues to maintain his innocence. Elizabeth pleaded guilty to accessory before the fact, meaning she helped plan or facilitate but wasn't present. She testified against Soring at his trial. She served 32 years of her 90-year sentence before parole and deportation to Canada. Soring maintains he confessed falsely to protect Elizabeth because he believed as a diplomat's son he'd receive better treatment. He served 29 years before parole and deportation to Germany. He continues fighting to overturn his conviction, with his attorney filing suit as recently as February 2026 based on the DNA evidence. A Netflix docuseries, Till Murder Do Us Part, Soring vs. Haysom, premiered in November 2023, examining the case and the questions that remain unanswered. Elizabeth has not participated in any media since release. She vanished into Western Canada, leaving behind decades of controversy about what actually happened on March 30, 1985. While Elizabeth Haysom's case involved disputed responsibility and DNA evidence excluding both defendants, the next case would involve acts so cruel the judge called them unspeakably wicked. Sarah Davey. Sarah Davey was 14 years old in 1998, a schoolgirl from Failsworth, Greater Manchester, England. Limited background information is publicly available. Neighbors described her as a seemingly normal student. Her co-offender, Lisa Healy, was 15. During later imprisonment at Askham Grange Open Prison, Davey earned the nickname Scary Sarah from fellow inmates, who called her the most feared inmate. In 1998, Davey and Healy befriended Lily, a lonely 71-year-old widow in Failsworth, whose husband had passed away in 1981, and whose only son had emigrated to Tasmania in 1970. The two girls got themselves invited into her home for tea. Once inside, they launched a sadistic assault. They forced her dentures down her throat, suffocating her. They threw a treasured photo of her son in the bin and trashed her home, writing their own names on walls and carving them into furniture. Afterward, the teenagers placed Lily's body in a wheelie bin, walked it through the streets, and dumped it in the Rochdale Canal, where it was found 3 days later. They then effectively moved into her home, making 258 phone calls from her phone and spending her pension money on crisps and chocolate. The perpetrators left their names carved into the furniture. People in the neighborhood were heard saying, "Sarah's ended Lily." The body was recovered from the canal. At trial in 1999, Mr. Justice Sachs called the act unspeakably wicked and stated, "You have both been convicted of an act of unbelievable cruelty. You have not shown the slightest trace of remorse or regret." Both received indeterminate life sentences with a minimum tariff of 8 years. Lisa Healy was released in 2009 after 11 years, receiving a taxpayer-funded identity change after becoming pregnant on day release. Sarah Davy was first released on license in March 2013, but was recalled to prison 7 times for breaching license conditions. In 2022, the parole board blocked her 8th release after substances were found in her system. She was finally released on parole on March 23, 2024, her 8th release. The parole board noted she had engaged with programs to address how she manages her emotions. Conservative MP Nigel Mills called it disgraceful. She remains under lifelong supervision and can be recalled at any time. What makes Davy's case so disturbing is the pattern of repeated failures on release. 7 recalls. 7 times she violated the conditions of her license and was sent back to prison. The 8th release finally occurred in March 2024, after substances were found in her system during the 7th attempted release. The cruelty of the original act, befriending a lonely elderly widow, getting invited for tea, then committing such acts that the judge called them unspeakably wicked, is compounded by the complete lack of remorse noted at trial. Mr. Justice Sachs specifically stated neither girl showed the slightest trace of remorse or regret. The carved names on furniture, the phone calls, 258 of them made from Lily's phone after her passing, spending her pension money on crisps and chocolate while her body was in the Rochdale Canal, moving into her home as if nothing had happened. These details reveal a callousness that went beyond the act itself. Lisa Healy served 11 years and was released with a new taxpayer-funded identity. She's been free since 2009. Sarah Davy, by contrast, was released and recalled 7 times over 11 years before finally being released for the 8th time in 2024. The nickname Scary Sarah from fellow inmates at Askham Grange, being called the most feared inmate even among other imprisoned individuals, suggests she maintained a reputation for intimidation even behind bars. Yet the parole board determined in 2024 that she'd engaged with programs to address how she manages her emotions and approved release. She remains under lifelong supervision. Any violation of her license conditions can result in immediate recall. She's been recalled 7 times already. Whether the 8th release will be permanent or whether she'll cycle back into custody again remains to be seen. While Davy was recalled 7 times for license violations, the next case would involve a teenage mastermind who remains the only conspirator still behind bars. Amy Lynn Pressmere. Amy Lynn Pressmere was a 16-year-old California girl described by high school friends as a typical girl next door. Born around 1981, she was in her 2nd year of high school when she met Richard Cowles Jr., then 19, at a house party. The two began a romantic relationship, and Amy soon learned she was expecting. She blamed Cowles for, in her words, ruining her life and ruining her birthday. About a month before the incident, Cowles had moved in with Amy and her friend Jennifer Kellogg into an apartment in Lancaster, California. On August 12, 1997, Amy set a plan into motion. She and Kellogg recruited William Billy Hoffman, a local store clerk, to carry out what would happen next. A 4th individual, David Ashbury, provided a means to do so. The group brought Hoffman to the apartment beforehand so he could familiarize himself with the layout and Cowles' routines. On the night in question, Hoffman concealed himself inside the residence while Amy was out with friends. When Cowles was alone, Hoffman confronted him. Amy returned roughly an hour later and called 911, feigning hysteria. When authorities arrived, Cowles was barely responsive. He could only say that his neck hurt. He did not survive. Deputy DA Michael Blake later stated that Amy had reached a point where she blamed Cowles for the pregnancy and had told others he had ruined her birthday and her life. By August 1997, Blake said, she was actively looking for someone to act on her behalf. Investigators noted that there was no forced entry and nothing was taken from the apartment, which ruled out robbery. Hoffman told several people about what had taken place within days, but it took months before those individuals came forward. An anonymous tip led to his arrest in April 1998. In 2002, Hoffman wrote a letter to the Cowles family confessing his involvement and identifying Amy as the one who orchestrated it. This letter prompted investigators to re-examine her role, and in 2005, Amy, Kellogg, and Ashbury were all taken into custody. Hoffman was convicted in 1999 and sentenced to life without parole plus 10 additional years. He was later granted parole after serving approximately 20 years. Kellogg pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and received 17 years. She has since been released. Ashbury received 2 years as an accessory. He has also been released. Amy pleaded not guilty and proceeded to trial. On July 30th, 2007, after more than 2 weeks of deliberation, a jury found her guilty of first-degree charges with the special circumstance of lying in wait, along with conspiracy and solicitation. On February 5th, 2008, she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. On appeal in 2010, the solicitation conviction was reversed on statute of limitations grounds. The remaining convictions were affirmed. However, prison records now indicate an eligible parole date of March 2029, suggesting some form of clemency or sentence modification has since occurred, possibly following Supreme Court rulings on juvenile sentencing. As of this recording, Amy remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She is the only one of the 4 conspirators still behind bars. She was featured on NBC's Dateline in May 2023. A parole suitability hearing was reportedly scheduled for November 2025. Amy has written about her experience from prison, with essays published on prison writers reflecting on her case and her time incarcerated. She is now in her early 40s, having spent her entire adult life in custody for what she set into motion at 16. While Amy's case centered on a single orchestrated act, the next case involves a pattern of cruelty so severe it led to the creation of Pennsylvania's Jennifer's Law. Angela Marinucci. Angela Marinucci, born around 1992, was 17 years old and the youngest member of the group dubbed the Greensburg Six from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. She suffered a head injury after being struck by a truck in 2008 at 15, which the defense argued triggered a behavioral downward spiral. Mental health experts testified she suffered from depression and possible substance issues. She was in a relationship with co-defendant Ricky Smarns, 25 years old. The trial judge described her family as hard-working and stable. Jennifer Lee Doherty, a 30-year-old mentally disabled woman described as having the mental abilities of an adolescent who trusted everyone, traveled to Smirn's apartment on February 8, 2010, believing the group were her friends. Over the next 3 days, she was held captive and subjected to horrific treatment. The group convened 4 family meetings at the last one. They unanimously voted to end her life. Doherty was struck in the chest and throat with a steak knife. Her body was wrapped in Christmas decorations, stuffed in a trash can, and left at Greensburg-Salem Middle School. Marinucci was described as the key player who lured Doherty to the apartment and initiated the harm. She was later seen jumping on her bed, excited to be on the news. In May 2011, Marinucci was convicted of first-degree ending and sentenced to the then mandatory life without parole. Prosecutors stated her age was the only thing preventing them from seeking capital punishment. Following the U.S. Supreme Court's rulings in Miller v. Alabama in 2012, and Montgomery versus Louisiana in 2016, invalidating mandatory juvenile life without parole. Marinucci was resentenced twice. First to life without parole again in 2015, then finally on May 31, 2022, to 60 years to life, 40 years, for ending plus 20 years for conspiracy. She was credited for 12 years served. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court declined to hear her appeal on July 15, 2024, finalizing the sentence. Marinucci is incarcerated at State Correctional Institution, Cambridge Springs, Pennsylvania. She is approximately 33 years old. Her earliest possible parole eligibility is 2070, when she would be 78. Co-defendants Smyrns and Knight remain on death row. The case led to Jennifer's Law in 2012, which criminalized failing to report witnessed serious incidents in Pennsylvania. What makes Marinucci's case so devastating is the premeditation combined with the cruelty. 4 family meetings. At the final meeting, they voted unanimously to end Jennifer Daugherty's life. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was discussed, debated, and decided by group vote. Marinucci was described as the key player who lured Daugherty to the apartment. Jennifer trusted these people. She believed they were her friends. She went to the apartment willingly, and Marinucci, the youngest of the group at 17, was the one who brought her there and initiated the harm. The detail about Marinucci jumping on her bed, excited to be on the news, reveals a disturbing disconnect from the gravity of what had occurred. Jennifer Daugherty had just been wrapped in Christmas decorations, stuffed in a trash can, and left at a school. And Marinucci was excited about the media attention. The head injury from being struck by a truck in 2008, 2 years before Jennifer's passing, became a central defense argument. The defense claimed this injury at 15 triggered behavioral changes that contributed to her participation. Mental health experts testified about depression and possible substance issues. The trial judge noted her family was hardworking and stable, suggesting this wasn't a case of chronic neglect or dysfunction. But the prosecution argued none of that excused or explained the level of premeditation and cruelty. Prosecutors stated her age was the only thing preventing them from seeking the death penalty. She was convicted of first-degree ending, with the mandatory sentence at that time of life without parole. The Supreme Court rulings on juvenile sentencing gave Marinucci 2 resentencing opportunities. The first resentencing in 2015 reimposed life without parole. But the second resentencing in 2022, following additional legal developments, resulted in 60 years to life. With credit for 12 years served, she needs to serve another 48 years before parole eligibility in 2070. She'll be 78 years old. Her co-defendants Smyrns and Knight remain on death row awaiting execution. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While Angela Marinucci won't see parole until 2070, the next case would involve someone released after serving just half her sentence. Shauna Hoare. Shauna Stacy Charmaine. Hoare was born on February 12, 1994, in Bristol, England. She spent her early years in the foster care system before returning to her birth mother, Lisa Donovan, at 13. In 2008, when she was only 14, she began a relationship with Nathan Matthews, who was 21, 7 years her senior. Her mother disapproved, describing Matthews as flirty, forward, and domineering. Hoare served as a caregiver for Matthews' mother, Angie Galsworthy, who had multiple sclerosis. She was 20 and pregnant at the time of the incident. On February 19, 2015, Matthews took the life of his 16-year-old stepsister, Rebecca "Becky" Watts, at the family home at 18 Crown Hill, Bristol. The family connection was complex. Becky's father, Darren, had married Angie Galsworthy, Matthews' mother. That morning, Matthews and Hoare were captured on camera at Tesco buying batteries, allegedly for items to be used in an abduction. Matthews went to Becky's bedroom with restraints and other items, and she lost her life during a struggle. She was then struck 15 times. The prosecution described this as a planned abduction with an improper motive. Matthews' devices contained troubling material focused on teenagers. Messages between Matthews and Hoare had discussed taking teenage girls in the months before. Over the following days, they disposed of Becky's remains using tools in their bathtub. The remains were wrapped and placed in suitcases, then hidden in a neighbor's shed. The couple ordered takeaway and played Monopoly the evening of the incident. After a 6-week trial at Bristol Crown Court on November 11, 2015, Matthews was found guilty. Hoare was cleared of the more serious charge but convicted of a lesser responsibility, along with conspiracy to abduct, interfering with the course of justice, and other charges. Matthews received a life term with a minimum of 33 years. Hoare received 17 years. The judge described her denials as obviously dishonest. Both appealed. The Court of Appeal rejected both applications on June 23, 2016. Shauna Hoare was let out of prison on license on September 1, 2023, after serving approximately 8.5 years, half her sentence. She was 29 years old. She is banned from returning to Bristol as a condition of her release. Becky's mother, Tanya Watts, expressed outrage. "I think she's cold and heartless." Matthews remains behind bars with earliest parole eligibility around 2048. Hoare is banned from returning to Bristol. She's on license, meaning any violation can result in being sent back to prison. But she's free at 29 years old, while Matthews won't be eligible for parole for another 23 years. The case drew comparisons to Fred and Rose West, the notorious couple who harmed multiple people, including their own family. The improper motivation, the planning, the disposal, and the apparent lack of remorse. These parallels made the case particularly shocking for the British public. While Hoare served 8.5 years and was let out, the next case would involve someone who's been sent back to prison multiple times because she cannot adapt to freedom. Natalie Rosalind Fenton. Natalie Rosalind Fenton was 15 years old, having turned 15 just 2 weeks before when she ended a man's life in South Auckland, New Zealand, in 1999. Born around 1984, she had an extraordinarily troubled background. She told a psychiatrist she was harmed by 3 of her father's friends when she was little. Her father passed away in 1993. She dropped out of primary school and became an adult worker and substance user at 11, selling herself to fund substances and beverages in Otahuhu. By 13, she was an armed robber with links to a gang, with convictions for aggravated assault, theft, and car theft. She met the victim, Raymond Mullins, an acquaintance of her mother's when she was 12. He paid her for relations on 5 occasions. She claimed she became pregnant by him in 1998 but miscarried. On April 1st, 1999, Fenton, her older sister Katrina Fenton, 19 years old, and their cousin Daniela Bowman, 17 to 18 years old, went to Mullins' factory at Plunkett Avenue, Papatoetoe, seeking $500 for travel to a birthday party. When Mullins refused, they left but returned around 5 p.m. Natalie was described as the ringleader. She struck Mullins repeatedly with a knife until the blade bent, then fetched another. Katrina held him down and struck him with a hammer. Daniela struck with a cooking pot, ashtray, and table leg. Mullins sustained 19 wounds. A letter was carved into his chest. A hard blow to the head and a deep gash to the neck ended his life. The girls bound and wrapped his body, dragged it downstairs, and placed it in the boot of his vehicle. They splashed paint around the factory and scrawled gang symbols on the walls to divert suspicion to a rival group. Police were not fooled. All three were arrested within 5 days. On February 16, 2000, all three were convicted and received life sentences. Fenton's minimum non-parole period was set at 10 years parole, eligible April 7, 2009. Fenton's parole history illustrates the extraordinary difficulty of reintegration. Despite completing treatment and rehabilitation programs, she was denied parole multiple times. In January 2016, the parole board granted release, noting she had spent more than half her life in prison aged 15 to 32. She was released on April 4th, 2016, but her release plan quickly collapsed. The board noted her lack of understanding of the ways of the modern world and her complete inability to cope in it. She sought to return to prison by breaching curfew and was recalled in May 2016. She was denied parole again in November 2016. At some point after 2017, she was released again, only to be jailed for 6 weeks in April 2022 for another curfew breach. In court, she described herself as a product of the system for 23 years. She remains on a life sentence under parole supervision indefinitely. Her cousin Daniela Bowman was granted parole in 2019 after serving 20 years. Daniela was 17 or 18 at the time of the offense, 3 years older than Natalie. She served her time, was released, and apparently successfully reintegrated. Natalie, by contrast, has been released and recalled multiple times. She remains on life sentence parole supervision indefinitely. Any violation like the curfew breaches that have already resulted in multiple recalls can send her back to prison immediately. She's now approximately 42 years old. She spent the vast majority of her life either imprisoned or on strict parole supervision. And the parole board's assessment suggests she may never be capable of truly independent living in the modern world. While Fenton cannot adapt to freedom after institutionalization, the next case would involve a healing lodge controversy that sparked national outrage in Canada. Terry Lynn McClintic. Terry Lynn McClintic, born in 1990 in Woodstock, Ontario, was 18 years old at the time of one of Canada's most notorious cases. Her birth mother was a stripper and substance user who could not keep her. She was given to Carol McClintic, a fellow dancer, who raised her in a household rife with chaos and substances. Terry Lynn moved in and out of foster care and children's aid facilities from age 7. She began smoking tobacco and marijuana at 8 and escalated to opiates. She reportedly harmed a family pet and later attacked Carol twice, leaving her partially blind in one eye. At 18, she had no job and was dating Michael Rafferty, 28 years old, who was 10 years her senior. On April 8, 2009, 8-year-old Victoria Torrey Stafford left Oliver Stevens Public School in Woodstock to walk home. McClintic approached her outside the school, luring her with promises of a puppy. Security cameras captured Torrey walking with an unknown woman at 3:32 p.m. McClintic placed Torrey in Rafferty's vehicle, covering her with a coat. They drove approximately 130 kilometers north. En route, they stopped at a Tim Hortons where McClintic mouthed, "I'm sorry," to Torrey, and at a Home Depot, where McClintic purchased a claw hammer and garbage bags at self-checkout on Rafferty's instructions. At a secluded farmer's field near Mount Forest, McClintic left the vehicle while Rafferty harmed the young victim. When McClintock returned, she placed a garbage bag over Tori's head and struck her repeatedly with the hammer. The body was covered with stones near a pine tree. Tori was reported missing that evening. The case triggered what was then Canada's largest ever search for a missing person. Security footage led to McClintock's identification through public tips. She was arrested on April 12th on another matter. When Rafferty visited her in detention, she told him she would take the fall for everything. Tori's remains were found on July 19th, 2009, 103 days after her disappearance, after McClintock assisted police in the search. McClintock pleaded guilty to first-degree ending and was sentenced to life with no parole eligibility for 25 years eligible May 19, 2031. At Rafferty's 2012 trial, she was the Crown's star witness. Testifying, "I savagely ended that little girl." Rafferty was convicted of first-degree ending, harmful contact, and kidnapping, receiving the same sentence. In December 2017, McClintock was transferred to the Okemo Otsi Healing Lodge, an unfenced facility for Indigenous women in Saskatchewan. She had self-identified as Indigenous, a claim disputed by family. When the transfer became public in October 2018, it sparked massive national controversy. Conservative MP Candice Bergen introduced a parliamentary motion to condemn the decision. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale ordered her return, and on November 8, 2018, McClintock was transferred back to the Grand Valley Institution for Women. New regulations were implemented, restricting transfers of long-term prisoners to healing lodges. McClintock remains incarcerated at Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener, Ontario, in medium security. She is not eligible for regular parole until May 19, 2031. She could potentially have applied under the Faint Hope Clause beginning in 2024, but no public reports suggest she has done so. What makes McClintock's case so inflammatory is the Healing Lodge controversy combined with the nature of the offense. Tori Stafford was 8 years old. She was lured from outside her school by McClintock's promise of a puppy. She was taken over 130 kilometers away. She was harmed by Rafferty while McClintock waited outside. Then McClintock placed a bag over her head and struck her with a hammer purchased specifically for that purpose. McClintock's own testimony, "I savagely ended that little girl," leaves no ambiguity about her role and culpability. She wasn't a passive bystander. She lured Tori. She purchased the hammer. She used it. The Healing Lodge transfer in 2017 sparked outrage because the Okemo Otsi Healing Lodge is an unfenced, minimum security facility designed for Indigenous women working toward reintegration. McClintock, who ended an 8-year-old, was placed there after claiming Indigenous identity that her own family disputed. When the transfer became public in October 2018, the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Conservative MP Candice Bergen introduced a parliamentary motion. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale, facing intense political pressure, ordered McClintock's return to Grand Valley Institution. The government implemented new regulations specifically to prevent similar transfers in the future. The controversy illustrated the tension between Indigenous healing approaches and public expectations about punishment for particularly heinous offenses. The Healing Lodge concept is rooted in Indigenous justice traditions, emphasizing rehabilitation over pure punishment. But applying those principles to someone who ended an 8-year-old and whose Indigenous identity was disputed proved politically and socially untenable. McClintock remains imprisoned at Grand Valley. She won't be eligible for parole until 2031, 22 years total. She's now approximately 35 years old. Rafferty is serving the same sentence at a different facility. While McClintock's Healing Lodge transfer sparked controversy in Canada, the next case would involve Britain's youngest female individual serving a sentence for such an offense. Sharon Carr. Sharon Louise Carr was born on December 21st, 1979, in Belize. One of 4 siblings, each with different fathers, she never knew her biological father. Her mother practiced voodoo and involved Sharon in animal sacrifice rituals. In 1986, the family moved to Camberley, Surrey. Her parents' marriage collapsed. Her mother poured boiling fat over her stepfather during an argument. Sharon developed a documented history of harming animals, tormenting cats, throwing hamsters in boiling oil, and ending a pet's life with a spade. Police later found dozens of animal remains near her home. In the early hours of June 7, 1992, when Sharon was just 12 years old, she struck 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe, a complete stranger, an apprentice hairdresser, 32 times with a 6.5-inch knife. The blows penetrated multiple areas. Ratcliffe had been out at a nightclub and was walking home alone. The body was driven to Farnborough and left by a cemetery wall. Exactly 2 years later, on June 7, 1994, Carr, then 14, struck 13-year-old fellow pupil Anne-Marie Clifford in the back at school, puncturing her lung. 5 students intervened. Carr was smiling during the attack. Police initially assumed the Ratcliffe perpetrator was an adult male. Over 500 men were questioned before the case went cold. The breakthrough came in 1995 when Carr, imprisoned for the school stabbing, boasted about the Ratcliffe case in phone calls and wrote graphic confessions in her diary. "If only I could end you again. I promise I would make you suffer more this time. Your terrified screams turned me on." She wrote, "I swear I was born to be one," and drew the weapon. She described details only the perpetrator could know: a specific injury police had withheld, a stolen bracelet, and a dog barking at the scene. She helped the police film a crime reconstruction, repeatedly laughing about the details. Carr's trial began in February 1997 at Winchester Crown Court. On March 25, 1997, she was found guilty by unanimous verdict after approximately 5 hours of deliberation. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 14 years, making her officially Britain's youngest ever female individual serving such a sentence at age 12 at the time of the offense, convicted at 17. She was reportedly smirking as she left the dock, nicknamed the Devil's Daughter by the press. Appeals in 1999 and 2004 to reduce her tariff or downgrade the conviction to manslaughter were denied. She was transferred to Broadmoor Hospital in 1998 under the Mental Health Act, diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and probable psychopathic disorder. At Broadmoor, she continued harming staff and patients, experienced episodes where she believed she was a lizard, and briefly became engaged to another individual serving time. She was moved to medium-secure facilities and then, in 2015, to HMP Bronzefield as a restricted status prisoner due to ongoing issues. Though eligible for parole since approximately 2011, Carr was denied parole in August 2023, with the board deeming her still too dangerous. As of the most recent available information, she remains incarcerated, likely at HMP Bronzefield. She is approximately 46 years old and has been imprisoned for over 31 years, more than double her minimum tariff. What makes Carr's case so disturbing is the combination of her age, 12 years old, with the nature of the offense and her subsequent behavior. 32 strikes against a complete stranger. Katie Ratcliffe was 18, walking home from a nightclub, and encountered a 12-year-old who ended her life in an extraordinarily intense attack. Exactly 2 years later, Carr struck a fellow student at school on the anniversary of Ratcliffe's passing. The 13-year-old victim survived because 5 students intervened. Carr was smiling during the attack. That detail, smiling while striking a classmate, reveals something profoundly disturbing about her mental state. The diary entries discovered while she was imprisoned for the school stabbing provided the breakthrough in the Ratcliffe case. If only I could end you again. I promise I would make you suffer more this time. Your terrified screams turned me on. This isn't remorse. This is someone who enjoyed what she did and fantasized about doing it again. I swear I was born to be one. This statement suggests Carr believed she was inherently destined for such acts. The drawing of the weapon, the details only the perpetrator could know, the laughing during the crime reconstruction. All of this demonstrated not only guilt, but a disturbing lack of empathy or remorse. The diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and probable psychopathic disorder helps explain but doesn't excuse. The psychotic episodes at Broadmoor, where she believed she was a lizard, indicate severe mental illness. But the consistent pattern of harm animals, Katie Ratcliffe, Anne-Marie Clifford, staff and patients at Broadmoor, demonstrates ongoing danger. She's been eligible for parole since approximately 2011. That's 14 years ago. She's now served over 31 years, more than double her minimum tariff of 14 years. Yet the parole board in 2023 determined she remains too dangerous for release. At 46 years old, Carr has now spent over 2/3 of her life imprisoned. She was 12 when she ended Katie Ratcliffe's life. She's 46 now. She may spend the rest of her life behind bars because the parole board continues to find she poses too great a risk to public safety. While Carr remains Britain's youngest female serving such a sentence and continues to be denied parole, the final case would involve a teenage girl who orchestrated her own father's ending. Courtney Schulhoff. Courtney Christine Schulhoff was born on December 27, 1987, in Washington, D.C. After her parents divorced, she moved to Altamonte Springs, Florida, with her father Stephen Eugene Schulhoff. She attended Lyman High School, dropped out, and was pursuing her GED. She was described as a thief, truant, substance user, and runaway. Her father tried to maintain control through discipline, restricting credit cards and enforcing groundings. Courtney told others he physically harmed her. The defense later alleged ongoing physical and inappropriate conduct. At 15, she began dating Michael Lawrence Morin Jr., a 20-year-old homeless man on probation for car theft, whom she met at a Greyhound racing track. Her father strongly disapproved. Morin would sneak in through her bedroom window at night. On the night of February 9th through 10th, 2004, when Courtney was 16, she placed a Louisville Slugger aluminum baseball bat outside her father's bedroom door while he slept. She then left the apartment. Morin picked up the bat, entered the bedroom, and beat Stephen Schulhoff, 48 years old, in his bed. The couple drove to a McDonald's 20 miles away in Orlando using Stephen's truck, then returned to the apartment. On February 11th, Stephen's girlfriend Elaine Book arrived to check on him and saw Courtney and Morin fleeing. She called 911. Both were arrested that day. Courtney initially claimed Morin acted independently. In a second statement, she admitted she intentionally left the bat by the door for Morin and waited at the tennis court while he carried out the act. Courtney's trial began on September 26, 2006, in Sanford, Florida. The prosecution alleged she orchestrated it. The defense portrayed her as a harm victim. She did not testify. The jury convicted her of first-degree premeditated ending after brief deliberation. She received the mandatory sentence of life without parole. In a remarkable courtroom moment, she then declared, "Your Honor, I would like to openly admit in court that Michael Morin is not the person who ended my father's life. I was. So, I accept full responsibility. At Morin's 2007 trial, Schulhoff testified in his defense, claiming she alone committed the act. Morin was nevertheless convicted and also sentenced to life without parole. Schulhoff's direct appeal was denied in 2008. Following the U.S. Supreme Court's rulings barring mandatory juvenile life without parole, she was resentenced on March 30, 2017, to 40 years. She is currently incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Florida DOC records indicate a current release date of February 2, 2038. She is 38 years old and has served over 21 years. Morin remains sentenced to life without parole, with no reported resentencing. What makes Schulhoff's case so complex is the claimed history of harm, combined with her confession that contradicted the prosecution's theory. The defense argued Stephen Schulhoff physically harmed and inappropriately conducted himself toward Courtney. The prosecution argued she orchestrated his ending because she wanted to be with Morin without her father's interference. The premeditation is clear. She placed the bat outside her father's bedroom door. She left the apartment. She waited at the tennis court while Morin carried out the act. Then they drove to McDonald's in her father's truck. Then they returned to the apartment. When discovered by Elaine Book on February 11th, they fled together. But then came the courtroom confession. I would like to openly admit in court that Michael Morin is not the person who ended my father's life. I was. So, I accept full responsibility. This statement made after her conviction and sentencing contradicted the prosecution's entire theory. At Morin's trial, she testified that she alone committed the act. She claimed she was protecting Morin from consequences for something she did. The jury didn't believe her. Morin was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. So what's the truth? Did Courtney orchestrate it and Morin carry it out, as the prosecution argued? Or did Courtney do it herself and then falsely implicate Morin, as she later claimed? The physical evidence, the bat placed outside the door, her absence from the apartment during the act, the drive to McDonald's together, supports the prosecution's theory. But why would she confess to being the sole perpetrator if she wasn't? Why would she testify at Morin's trial claiming she did it alone? One possibility: guilt over Morin receiving life without parole for an act she orchestrated. Another possibility: an attempt to exonerate Morin by claiming sole responsibility, which the jury rejected as implausible. The Supreme Court rulings on juvenile sentencing gave Schulhoff resentencing opportunity. In 2017, her mandatory life without parole sentence was reduced to 40 years. With credit for time served, her current release date is February 2038, when she'll be approximately 50 years old. Morin has received no resentencing, despite also being convicted for an act committed when Courtney was 16 and he was 20. He remains serving life without parole. The disparity, Courtney getting 40 years while Morin remains at life without parole, may reflect judicial recognition of her age at the time, the harm allegations, and the possibility that Morin exploited a vulnerable teenager. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.